Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. We'd originally planned to hold this presentation in Christchurch back in May, but something called a pandemic or pestilence stopped us from doing so. Anyway, it's great to see many of you joining us online today for the Stewart Heaton Webinar series. This is the first of a two-part webinar series, which is showcasing the Leading Practice in Mental Health award winners from last year. The first one being Fire and Rescue New South Wales and also Fire and Emergency New Zealand. My name is Michael Baldy. I'm the chair of the AFAC Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee, and I'm also the Executive Director of People and Culture at Fire and Rescue New South Wales. I'll be your host for this session today, and I'm delighted to have that opportunity. I'd like to start by doing an acknowledgement of country, and I'm acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from Guringai country, which is the land of the Gadigal people in the northern beaches of New South Wales. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands in which you all join us from today, and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and the waters across our great nation. Before we begin, and on behalf of AFAC, I'd just like to thank Stewart Heaton Clothing Company for their generous sponsorship of this event. Stewart Heaton partnered with AFAC in 2018 to recognise agencies that are at the forefront of leading practice in mental health and wellbeing space, which we all know is extremely important and is a growing area. Through this partnership, AFAC created the Leading Practice in Mental Health Award, which is awarded on an annual basis. Stewart Heaton aim to support an industry culture that adopts leading practice and spreads the benefits of innovative and creative mental health initiatives across all first responding agencies in Australia. Through the generous sponsorship of Stewart Heaton, award winners are able to choose the topic of their annual masterclass event. I'll introduce our speakers shortly, but firstly, before I do so, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping issues. Today's event will be recorded and will be made available following the event, along with the presentation slides after the event. Today we'll be using the Q&A feature on Zoom to take your questions. You'll see that down at the bottom bar, the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please post your questions in the Q&A box, but not in the chat window. You'll be able to do something called upvote on questions by clicking the thumbs up button, which is on your toolbar. I'll do my best to ask a number of questions to our speakers following the presentations. I encourage you to use the chat window at the bottom of the toolbar, in which you can share any thoughts or reflections during the presentation. Just a reminder that you'll need to select all panelists and attendees in the drop-down menu for everybody attending today in order to view your messages. I'd also like to remind you to be respectful to each other and our presenters when posting your comments on questions in this, which is a public event. I'd like you to please welcome me in joining our three speakers for today. First, we have Dr. Sive Joyce, who's a senior psychologist and co-founder of MindDrama.com and a fellow at the Black Dog Institute. Sive is a senior psychologist who works both clinically and academically. She has expertise in resilience and workplace mental health. Her research is focused on the development of evidence-based workplace programs to protect employee mental health and well-being. Her online resilience training program, Mind Armour, teaches essential skills to bolster adaptive resilience to psychological well-being. Brendan Mott, I'm proud to say, is the Manager of Health Promotion from the Health and Safety branch within Fire and Rescue. Brendan's responsible for overseeing the development and implementation of a range of injury and illness prevention programs across the fire and rescue employee lifecycle. In addition to 12 years experience in the fields of injury prevention and rehabilitation, and as an accredited exercise psychologist, Brendan's experience within fire rescue has seen him develop an extensive applied knowledge in the areas of tactical strength and conditioning, thermal physiology, infection control, psychological resilience, physical aptitude testing, health surveillance, and medical assessment for safety critical workers. Brendan is really the ideas and the impetus behind the Raw Mind Coach program, which has been so successful in Fire and Rescue New South Wales. I'd also like to introduce Tracy Cass, who's our occupational psychologist in Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Tracy has got previous consulting experience for some of Australia's leading safety and psychological health and wellbeing organisations. Tracy has a significant experience in applying psychology in the workplace through the design and delivery of mental health and wellbeing programs. She's published award-winning research and delivered numerous presentations on workplace mental health and wellbeing. Tracy is passionate about championing the workplace in which employees are psychologically well, engaged and supported and perform at their optimum. I'd like to welcome our three presenters today. It's over to you, Sive, Brendan and Tracy.
Thanks very much, Michael. Just like to welcome everyone online, and I guess I'd very much like to thank AFAC for their support in coordinating today's event, and obviously Stewart Heaton for affording us an opportunity to present also, and the support they give, I guess, the AFAC agencies when it comes to recognising the innovative work that is taking place across a lot of our agencies in the first responder context. My role today is really to set the scene on what I am highly confident will be a very informative session. The Raw Mind Coach program is an innovative solution to, I guess, a major workplace health and safety issue that we all face with respects to the risk of psychological injury. And I think the presentation today should provide a lot of insight into, I guess, the science and the research behind how we feel it has a place in our programs moving forward as a sector. There's so much happening in the first responder space. It really is a case of not getting mental health on the radar anymore. I think it's well and truly on the radar in a lot of our agencies. But we continue to face a lot of challenges as we go along this journey together. For Fire and Rescue New South Wales, those challenges are both fiscal and obviously logistic in nature. 6,500 firefighters that are distributed right across the state, across 339 stations. And I guess on the flip side, we also have 500 admin and trade staff that we shouldn't lose sight of needing to support either. So it is a big undertaking. And I guess building partnerships like we have been able to build with the University of New South Wales and the Black Dog Institute, and that culminating in projects and initiatives and programs such as the Raw Mind Coach is really been a key area that Fire and Rescue has tried to focus on, particularly in the past 10 years. And in my presentation this morning, I'll just try and give everyone a little bit of an idea about how that journey has unfolded. And then obviously we'll have a much more detailed look into the program development, and Sive will make sure that we're well and truly informed in that regard. I'm mindful of the need to get to that focus area, so Sive can impart her subject matter expertise onto us. But I might just start with that slide one, Sive, if we just head back to that journey that we've been through as an agency at Fire and Rescue New South Wales. So I guess our programs, like many, kicked off with, I guess, a support focus around peer support and EAP programs. So in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the effort was put into, I guess, those programs to largely respond to critical incidents and trauma in the workplace. And them in themselves were very innovative programs. We obviously had a lot more stigma in the workplace during that time. And these programs, I guess, really went a long way to try to address that in the early days. From a fire and rescue perspective, credit has to go to retired Station Officer Bill Clifford, who really pioneered the peer support model through a Churchill Fellowship that he actually did in the late 80s and early 90s. And he was really a pioneer in that space. I guess over time, those programs serve their purpose. But for us as an agency, a big switch in our focus occurred back in 2009 with an Australian Research Council grant and survey that we did of our workforce that really highlighted the need for us to be far more proactive in our approach to looking at mental health, and no longer just relying on the fact that we need to support people when they become unwell, or in fact, support people post-critical incident. So that was a big change in I guess, our outlook, and we reflected that in a policy that was then drafted and subsequently published, and that built itself. Well, the policy itself was built on 4 pillars. So there was the traditional response and support aspects, but we also had an increased focus on building awareness across our workforce, and then in the prevention of psychological injury as well. So on the backside of that, well, I guess we then went through and developed a number of research partnerships that look to build a number of programs. We'll obviously hear about Royal Mind Coach today. My next slide, we'll go through and have a bit more of a closer look at exactly what some of the initiatives and programs that we have built on, just to provide a bit of an overview about how RAW fits in the bigger picture. But they are in a number of different areas, and I'll highlight those. Strategy development, I guess from our perspective, we're very much at a point now where strategically we're looking to embed a lot of our research. We're looking to integrate programs in together, and we're looking at ways that we can further enhance our programs as we move forward. So very much a continuing journey. Thanks, Ive. The employee lifecycle approach that we take at Fire and Rescue, I guess, really looks at that complete transition from people from the time they're recruited into the organisation through promotional programs, and then importantly into retirement as well. We know the prevalence of psychological injury amongst retired first responders is actually higher than in current serving members. So we have a big responsibility there when it comes to supporting people during that transition, and in fact into retirement as well. So I guess just the purpose of this slide is really just to give a bit of an overview. I won't do a deep dive into these programs, and if people are interested in finding out more than happy to link in and speak with other people. From a recruitment perspective, we run a program called Fit Mind, which really looks to encourage help-seeking behaviour early on in our new firefighters. It's definitely got a peer element to it, in the sense that the breaking down of stigma around seeking help really starts to be broken down early on by the lived experience of a lot of our firefighters. So the acronym itself relates to finding time to look after yourself as an individual and as team. And then also the mind part relates to how we can seek support. So support can be obviously through our peers or our mates, which is what the M stands for. We can look at internal supports such as our wellbeing team. We can look at networks of support outside of Fire and Rescue New South Wales, such as our family and friends. And then importantly as well, the D standing for doctor, and looking at external supports in terms of psychology assistance or psychological assistance, and also obviously medical care where required. So it really starts to get people into that early help-seeking behaviour early on. I guess as we transition through, then we have bystander engagement training that we're running for our firefighters now to improve their capacity to deal with incidents on the ground. We have a leading from within program and a station officer promotional program that then go through and teach our new leaders the skills that we believe are really important in managing their crew's mental health, both proactively and in response to critical incidents. We've got a respect program that we run with the Black Dog Institute for our inspectors program, which really looks at building skills, good practical skills when it comes to managing employee welfare, and giving people increased confidence to reach out to people if they are off work for a psychological injury. We've got a lot of work in our transition space in terms of transitioning people into alternate careers if they are medically discharged from the organisation. or in fact, if they're redeployed internally as well. And I guess we've got our retiree peer support program that's built on the back of our existing and current peer support program internally within the organisation. And then I guess underpinning that, Raw Mind Coach is a program that we offer voluntarily at the moment across our whole workforce, and is obviously a focus for today's program, and was the program that we put forward for the Stewart Heaton Award, and we're lucky enough to be one of the winners of that award. So on the back of that, I'll pass over to Sive to learn more specifically about the Raw Mind Coach program. And as I said, more than happy for people to reach out about any of these programs and discuss them in more detail. Thanks, Sive.
Thanks, Brendan. Hi, everybody. I guess just what I'd like to share is what Brendan had highlighted there a moment ago, is this ongoing relationship that FRNSW have fostered with the Black Dog Institute and the Workplace Mental Health Research Team at the University of New South Wales since 2012. And that's when I joined Associate Professor Harvey's team to really have a strong focus, not just on workplace mental health, but initially this team was formed to have a strong focus on the mental health of first responders and to really address the challenges first responders, such as firefighters, experience in their day-to-day lives and their work. It's an ongoing partnership, as Brendan said, and we have numerous different projects. So Brendan's kindly shared that he's happy for you to approach him about the programs, but you can also check out the website because a lot of the research is detailed there too. One of the core pieces of research that we initially put out, it was originally a 2014 report for the Australian Mental Health Commission, but this was later published in 2017 as a framework article where our team went through a process of looking at many reviews in the space of workplace mental health and occupational health. And we identified these 5 core areas that needed to be targeted when addressing workplace mental health and when creating mentally healthy workplaces. And this is where resilience started to emerge as a core aspect of creating mentally healthy workplaces. And it was where I started to get more interest in this area. Before I go into our research project and how Raw Mind Coach emerged, one thing that we started to establish very early on was that there were many varying definitions to resilience. And particularly when I started doing some work with firefighters, it became clear that there's a lot of confusion about what resilience is and what it isn't. There's been a strong tendency in our culture to view resilience as just being tough and this ability to move through life unscathed by the challenges that we experience. Whereas what our research has found, and the Australian Psychological Association also highlight this, is that resilience is essentially a very dynamic process, and it's influenced by a lot of different factors and resources. And we can actually develop it over time. So it reflects our ability to adjust and adapt during periods of adversity and change and uncertainty, all of the things that every human being during this pandemic has been faced with. But we also looked at the literature, and I'll speak to this in a moment, and found that there are specific skills and strategies that can build our resilience over time too. I was interested in 2 core research questions initially before creating the Raw Mind Coach program. But prior to starting with Sam's team at the Black Dog Institute, I'd been working for about 6 years, both in occupational rehab settings and in inpatient, outpatient settings at a mental health hospital out in Northwest Sydney. And that experience was both humbling, but also extremely educational. Because of these inpatient and outpatient settings, I was working with many different people who were coming to attend programs to address issues related to anxiety, depression, addictions issues, as well as trauma. And I often met many first responders, a lot of police officers, many firefighters and paramedics who sat in on our group therapy programs. I ran a 10 to 12-week program as an outpatient setting where we would help people develop skills. And this is where I really started to learn what skills and strategies were actually resonating with people and what just were not resonating. And at the back of my mind, I started to formulate this question: But what skills are really helping us build resilience, and what would it look like if first responders had access, along with other occupations, to these skills very early on in their career, or even if they were suddenly allowed to have access to these skills? Would it help them manage stress and change in a more effective way? And so in 2014, I had the opportunity to start a PhD and work closely with the Black Duck Institute and Fire and Rescue New South Wales because of their ongoing research partnership. And so we wanted to look initially at what works in the resilience space across every occupation, every area, and we conducted a meta review to do this. But secondly, to establish, using that information, a new program. How do we make a program that's accessible for a geographically dispersed workplace like Fire and Rescue New South Wales? And that's when we developed our prototype program based on what we found. So the meta-analysis found that resilience training does work, and you can see that while we started off with a lot of, more than 400 articles, the quality of the research was quite, different, and we ended up only having about 12 in our meta-analysis, which is quite good for a meta-analysis. The best evidence existed for training programs that incorporated both cognitive behavioral therapy strategies and mindfulness training. This paper is freely downloadable online if anyone wants to read it in more detail. So we used this information to help build a training program that was not only informed by this meta-analysis, but also my experience running group therapy. And I specifically honed in on drawing on strategies from evidence-based therapies that we know work, but I had also witnessed people really respond well to, and found a way to really support them in their healing journey through anxiety, depression, or even a combination of that and trauma. So we drew greatly on acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and compassion-focused therapy. Our research cohort included full-time firefighters. We had 20 primary rescue stations across the state of New South Wales and 4 hazmat stations. And these were randomly assigned to our intervention group along with our control group. We knew from the data that we'd already collected from firefighters that this is a group that have high potential to be exposed to potentially traumatic events. They have traditionally higher rates of PTSD and common mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression, as well as alcohol misuse. But they are, in fact, as with any first responder group, one of the most ideal occupational groups to evaluate a resilience training program with, because of the nature of their work and the fact that they're dealing with a lot of stress in their daily work. They may not necessarily see it that way, because first responders have this wonderful capacity to build on their natural resilience and to adjust to their work. But the fact is, compared to other occupations, they do experience a lot of stress in their daily, as I said, in their daily work. With our research, we engaged peer supporters very quickly in collecting our research data, and peer supporters played a very big role in my research in terms of I trained them up over a workshop over 2 days, and these peer supporters brought the program to the intervention group in terms of introducing the research project and asking firefighters would they be interested in volunteering. And we were very lucky to have 143 full-time firefighters enroll in this research. We collected data at baseline, immediately after training, and at 6-month follow-up. And at this point in time, back in 2015, as we were rolling out the project, there were very few resilience training programs that had collected any data post maybe even 3 months. So this was fairly new. It's also the first time worldwide that a resilience training program had been delivered wholly online. And we really wanted to see, could this work, especially for large groups of workers who are potentially all over the country or geographically dispersed across a state like New South Wales. And so what we found was that the program worked. At 6-month follow-up, we found greater increases in adaptive resilience as measured by the Connors-Davidson Resilience Scale, which is one of the most validated measures of resilience we currently have as researchers, compared to the control group. And our control group got some very standard information on well-being. We found a fairly moderate to almost large effect size for the program, which was wonderful. And if you'd like to read this paper, this is also freely available online, just following and looking up this reference. Some of the benefits that we found from our research was not only increases in adaptive resilience, but increases in these areas that we had targeted in the program that in the literature we refer to as resilience resources. So mindfulness, unsurprisingly, because it had such a strong component teaching mindfulness in the training, mindfulness of course increased, but we also found increases in the level of optimism and the use of active coping, so healthy coping strategies, a greater use of emotional support. And to me, this is one of the more important findings. We found that instrumental support also increased. So this reflects our ability to reach out for practical advice and support from others when we need it, which can be a bit trickier to change, we have found in the research. From this, what we decided to do from feedback from first responders was to create an updated version of the program. So the program is now 10 sessions. Originally it was 6 sessions and they were 20 minutes each. We've now made them more streamlined. We have 10 short sessions. It's accessible on smartphone, tablet, and computer. All of the audio tracks can be downloaded. So there are 12 core audio tracks, but now we also have some additional in our brain food section. So our brain food section is this library that we continuously update over time. So every month we add additional material. And the reason we do this, so we have new podcasts and videos and different articles, is that we want to continuously engage our first responder groups, but also our other learners who are now part of our program, to view their resilience as something that will naturally fluctuate over time. So resilience is much like a garden. That's how I refer to it. We need to water our gardens and we need to tend to them for them to survive and to also flourish. And so there are different ways a human being can engage certain skills to nourish their resilience, but it's not uncommon for it to fluctuate, particularly after stress. So this brain food section really aims to always encourage people to come back to refresh their skills, but to maybe explore other areas that they may be interested in. And that's why we have a newsletter and different emails to encourage people to come back to the training. And we recently this year launched a podcast where we have our senior journalist, Dean Yates, interview different people about their own personal journeys of resilience. And we're very lucky to have firefighters from Fire and Rescue New South Wales also participate in this podcast and share their insights. At present, this is what the program looks like now for Fire and Rescue New South Wales. So when you log in, this is the home page. There are 10 short sessions, as I'd mentioned. You can access them at any time point. So if you're intrigued by what the compassion myth is, a learner can just jump straight into that particular session. But we do encourage people to follow the 10 session route, so 1 to 10. The first several skills are very focused on cognitive strategies and basic mindfulness training and how to understand your brain and how different strategies support you in stepping back from unhelpful thoughts. Whereas session 5 starts to look at what can we learn from using mindfulness to manage tricky emotions as they emerge. So we start to bring in some of Paul Gilbert's work in the UK and from the research trial, using mindfulness with emotions, using very specific strategies to help us manage challenging emotions in a very compassionate way when they emerge. Session 6 looks at our values as human beings and what areas of our life may need some TLC, and setting up some practical goals that are then emailed directly back to you or saved in your device to prompt you to take action later on. Session 7 looks at another specific skill, and this is where we were able to work very closely with Fire and Rescue to pick out some very specific examples that are unique to firefighters that they may experience on the job. And the sphere of influence is a cognitive strategy of understanding when things are outside and inside your control and at times outside of our control, and how that can cause us stress if we can't step back from them. And as I mentioned, the compassion myth looks a little bit more deeply in terms of how do we apply self-compassion to our minds and bodies in daily life to help bolster our resilience and nourish that resilience over time. In session 9, we start to weave in some of the more updated research and findings on looking after our physical body, ensuring that we are getting good quality sleep. And so we're sharing some of the psychoeducation on how diet and sleep and exercise very much influence our mental health, particularly sleep. We have very specific meditations that are there to help foster greater quality sleep. We collaborated with the iRest Institute in the USA to help develop these particular meditations, because we know during sleep it's the only time the brain detoxes, and if sleep is starting to become impacted, it can have a direct impact on everything else we do in life, particularly our mental health. And finally, in session 10, and I'll speak to this at the end of the presentation, we have a process where a learner will reflect on the type of support that they're going to reach out to when they have tough days on the job, because we're all going to have tough days on the job. It's part of the whole human condition. But we ask our learners to reflect on the journey that they've been through and to pick out the strategies that truly resonate with them. And then that action plan gets sent back to them directly in an email. And this is the format that we continue with in nearly all of our programs. This is the cast, very briefly, of our program. There's a lot of colorful characters. One of the core reasons we went with animation is that it allows flexibility and customization. So if a group comes to work with us, for example, we recently worked with Victoria Ambulance, we're able to customize different parts of the program to reflect the unique experiences of Vic Ambulance paramedics, as well as other groups. But also, the brain loves color. We know from neuropsychology and neurosciences that the brain loves humor, and it loves color, and it loves quirkiness. So it's more likely to remember things that are a little bit more quirky. So we're trying to take advantage of that too. We have the characters in Fire and Rescue kitted out in their uniform gear. And again, just an overview here is the strategies that are taught in the program are very focused on what we learned in the RCT: cognitive strategies, mindfulness training, some values reflection. This in itself, learning how emotions are linked to our personal values, is a specific resilience skill and strategy, something that's probably been underestimated, but it's a very important skill. And it's something that we have learned over the last few years, that even firefighters have shared that understanding the emotion, the value that's underneath a tricky emotion, can be hugely supportive to them. So right at the end of the program, I mentioned there is this action plan where learners complete the plan, they reflect on the program, and again, they're encouraged to choose the strategies that resonate with them, not what they feel they should be doing, but what mindfulness strategies really resonated with them, what self-care strategies, who are they going to reach out to for support in their work life and in their home life. And so again, they're doing a little bit of prep work, acknowledging that there are going to be tough days on the job. But also throughout the program, we strongly emphasize that when people reach out for support, whether you're a first responder, whether you work for Corrective Services New South Wales, whether you were a nurse on the front line, reaching out for support is always an act of resilience. So throughout the program, we're constantly reinforcing this idea that resilience requires us as human beings to reach out for support, that we shouldn't be going it alone. And in fact, we tend to cope much better with change and adversity when we're engaging our support networks and allowing ourselves to be supported. So throughout the program, at the end of each module, and also at the end of the program, there are all the details of Fire and Rescue's current resources, a lot of the programs that Brendan referenced earlier, but importantly, their EAP, the details of their wellbeing team, chaplaincy, etc. I'll just very briefly, before I hand over to Tracy, is to highlight some of the other interesting findings. And the findings included that when we did a sub-analysis looking at the impact of mindfulness in this group, we found that the firefighters, all of the firefighters, so in both groups, our control and our treatment group, those who reported greater levels of mindfulness at baseline were reporting lower levels of common mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression, and much greater levels of well-being. So it's again reinforcing this, I would say, a strong body of literature now that's highlighting the mental health benefits of mindfulness. We also found, we looked at a subsample of firefighters, and we wanted to look at firefighters who in the last 6 months had 6 months had been exposed to a potentially traumatic event on the job. And when we looked at these first responders, those who reported low resilience at baseline, so just before the research interventions started, were much more likely at 6 months to report greater levels of depression and greater symptoms of PTSD. What this highlights is that adaptive resilience is one of those potential risk factors when it's low that can be targeted in early intervention. And it also supports research findings from the UK back in 2016. The wonderful researcher Jennifer Wild at Oxford University found very similar findings among new graduate paramedics, that low resilience using the same measure among new graduate paramedics 2 years later, it predicted an episode of major depression. So it's highlighting that as we target early resilience, there's likely to be greater mental health benefits over time. Fairly quickly here, we've customized versions now developed from Fire and Rescue New South Wales. One of our development partners were New South Wales Ambulance. They have their own version of the program where it's mandatory training for all of their staff. We've created a customized version for our friends up in the Northern Territory at St. John Ambulance. And this year we launched with Corrective Services New South Wales to support their custodial officers and their community officers. And last month we also launched with Ambulance Victoria, their own customized version. The customization process is very collaborative. We do a lot of consulting up front, and Tracy and Brendan can share their experiences with this. We work very closely to tailor the script, to pick out certain modules where we can really address specific stressors in this workplace. We include the same resilience check that we use throughout the research. We're constantly collecting data, but this data is shared back with the organization, which we've done for Fire and Rescue, to further, not just provide feedback, but to further inform their overall workplace mental health strategy. Our programs generally involve a welcome video from senior leadership or other senior staff members. We have a customized support section in the background so you can see how people are progressing through the program. And we also have a completion certificate for certain groups, such as paramedics. They're able to use this training as part of their professional development in CPD. So I'm going to hand over to Tracy to chat a little bit, and Brendan, about the implementation process at Fire and Rescue New South Wales.
Thank you, Sive. Thank you. The data that Sive said that is provided as feedback to an agency in terms of the completion rates of the program, the uptake, whether somebody has kind of registered and not actually started the program itself, all that is really rich, and we can then use that to be targeted in our promotional activities. So at the very beginning of the commencement of the program, we were looking to build awareness of the program. So we adopted strategies that would enable that. And then as the program was rolled out, using our peer supporters as champions of the program, we then became targeted in terms of, well, what do we now need to do? It might be that we want to increase uptake, or we want to encourage individuals who had started the program but hadn't actually completed. So the data told us that that was an issue. And so what we did was we created promotional programs that were time limited and provided very attractive prizes like Fitbits for people who had started the program, but they completed it within, say, Mindful May. And so in that way, we adjusted our promotional activities in accordance with what the data was telling us. And we're continuing to do that. And our next promotional activity will be in relation to broadening the, I guess, the sort of application or thinking about how the program might make sense for firefighters at stations, for instance, in terms of their relationships. So we're looking at how can we build social connection and create some kind of buddy sort of incentive to increase the uptake and the awareness about the program. So I'll just, Sive, if you could move on to the next slide. So this is kind of my one slide, and I was thinking about this morning. So I've written some notes, and I'm going to read my notes if that's okay with you. So I'm going to start with maybe, at the risk of sounding like we're at maybe a private, sensitive kind of meeting, I'll say first up, I'm Tracy and I'm a meditator. And so I've practiced meditation for 37 years. since I was a 20-year-old university student taking hatha yoga classes on campus with a traditional Indian yoga teacher called Acharya Upendra Roy. And at age 21, I was introduced to a style of meditation called Vipassana meditation. Vipassana means to see things as they really are. And I've spent 10-day stints, several 10-day stints over the years at the Vipassana Meditation Centre at Blackheath. You might have heard of that. It's the one where you don't talk to anyone for 10 days. So we were up at 4 a.m. and meditating for at least 10 hours every day. I studied and became a yoga teacher, actually, and owned my own health business for 17 years. And among other things, I taught yoga and meditation to hundreds and hundreds of people, children, professional athletes, people in workplaces, aged care homes, all sorts. And practicing the skill and habit of meditation has been one of the things that I'm most grateful for as a tool for life. And it's helped me manage anxiety, give birth to my 2 sons without pain medication, cope with the grief of losing loved ones, and really just better appreciate the bittersweet wild beauty of all that life has to offer. Fast forward, I've since trained as a psychologist, and the world by now is talking about mindfulness rather than meditation. And as a scientist practitioner, I was very interested in the science behind meditation and mindfulness. I know I've found benefits, I'm a sample of one, but what does the research tell us? And I was particularly interested to understand how mindfulness might be helpful in the workplace. So a couple of years ago, I explored that in depth and wrote a white paper which outlined benefits for leaders and teams and stress management, high performance, and so on. And for me, learning about and keeping up to date with current research is important because I want to ensure the best possible results for the people that I'm helping by sharing tools and techniques that work. And at Fire and Rescue, my job as occupational psychologist is to support the mental health and wellbeing of all of our employees, our firefighters and those of us who support them to do their job. Now, if I could personally teach mindfulness as a tool for life to our 7,300 employees, I would. But having Raw Mind Coach as a scalable, accessible mindfulness resource to offer instead is great. And I know there's a lot of flaky, self-help, random bits of information floating around about mindfulness. But I know that SIVE has a commitment to using evidence-based information, and the mindfulness activities that she provides are backed by evidence. And for me, that's essential. And also the Irish accent happens to be my personal favourite. So I am a bit biased there. But SIVE's soothing voice guiding us through the mindfulness tracks is an absolute pleasure to listen to. On a strategic level at Fire and Rescue, we take an integrated approach to managing mental health, and our programs as such focus on prevention of psychological injury, supporting people in need, and promoting positive mental health. And I'd like to finish up by sharing with you 3 practical ways that I personally use Raw Mind Coach at Fire and Rescue. And these are informed by and aligned with that 3-pronged integrated approach that we take to mental health. 1, when I'm sharing information with firefighters about being psychologically prepared to meet the demands of their work, I'll recommend that they try RAW. And this is to help facilitate a professional mindset and sharpen their cognitive control and attentional focus on the job, to feel their best, be their best, and to do their best. 2, at fire stations in our regional areas with our amazing on-call firefighters who are members of their local community with day jobs and also respond to fire and rescue incidents. That might be motor vehicle accidents, house or bushfires. You know, they don't get to switch off and relax much. So I'll recommend that they try mindfulness through RAW to recharge and recover and replenish their energy levels and inner resources. 3, when speaking with firefighters about developing strategies to help navigate those stronger emotional reactions following some of the more intense critical incidents, which is an inherent stressor in the first responder work context, I'll introduce breathing techniques and encourage mindfulness as practical tools to help with that psychological winding down. And I'm trying to support people to activate the parasympathetic, the rest and digest nervous system, and to regulate their emotions. So I'm going to hand you back now to the lovely SIVE to continue with the presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks so much for sharing your insights. I just would like to finish our part of the presentation here by sharing that if you would like to preview our program recently went through a name change, so we're now called Mind Dharma. And if you'd like to preview the program, our friends at Fire and Rescue have kindly offered that it's okay for anyone to go in and from a fire department or fire and rescue space to view their version of the program over a 2 or 3 week period. And we've had different agencies do this actually all over the world. Ambulance Victoria have kindly offered for any ambulance groups or paramedics who are interested in their version to do the same, so that you can have a real look at how the program has been customized for these 2 different organizations in the first responder space. We also have a universal version, which we've been lucky enough to develop in collaboration with the Black Dog Institute. So if you'd like to see a universal version, we're happy to do this too. You just need to send us through an email. And for those of you who are research nerds like the 3 of us are, I provided a list of references. So if you later want to come back and look at this, my understanding is AFAC that are recording this, and you can have a look at the research that I mentioned in a bit more detail. So I think we're up to the Q&A part.
That's right, Sive. Thank you, Sive and Tracy and Brendan, for a very informative and wonderful presentation. I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. We have a couple of questions there in the Q&A. I think the first one was already answered by your presentation, Sive. It was really, do we have to be part of fire and rescue to access the resources, or are they open to those outside the organisation? So I'm pretty sure we've covered that, but is there anything the panel would like to add in respect to that question?
So there are certain resources that we have on the Mind Dharma website that can be viewed. So they're all a lot of our articles that we put up, and people sometimes just screenshot them and share them through their wellbeing team or with their respective employees. But if you'd like to preview Fire and Rescue's version, Brendan's kindly given the sign off on that being allowed. Just get in touch, and we're happy for you to have a trial so you can have a real feel for it. And to be honest, that's probably the best way to get a sense of the program. What do you think, Tracy and Brendan? Sometimes you've got to experience these kind of programs to get a feel for them.
Yeah, certainly. I think I think when you see the customisation, you can start to get a feel for how the workforce might respond to it. And I think the tailoring of the program was definitely something that we were highly mindful of. Obviously, firefighters love to feel that the program has been customised for them and their unique challenges when it comes to the occupational stresses associated with their line of work. And I think, getting a good feel for how the program, accommodates that is I guess only really achievable if you get in and have a good look at it.
Thanks, Brendan. There's a question from John who asks, what proportion of New South Wales firefighters does N143 represent? I guess we've got 4 different agencies in New South Wales that provide firefighters. We've got the Fire and Rescue, Rural Fire, National Parks. So they all contribute in some way to firefighting. But I assume that question relates to Fire and Rescue presentation. Brendan, do you have any insight onto that one? Yeah,
so I think that's referring to the research cohort that Sive would have cited in her presentation. Obviously, as I mentioned just in the opening, we have 6,500 firefighters, pretty much split down the middle in terms of on-call firefighters and permanent firefighters across the state. So obviously that 143 were just a sample that we utilised as part of the randomised control trial that we undertook with Sive at the start. So it's a relatively small sample, but definitely one that gave us a lot of power when it came to the statistics sitting behind that. So I guess, probably if we do the figures on that, I'm just doing them in my head there now, it probably represents maybe 5% of our workforce or something like that, that figure.
I guess this is very common in research projects, however, that, you know, we are working with sample sizes that are a small percentage of the representation of an organization. But we did do a power calculation for our, which essentially is a statistical analysis to help establish how many firefighters do you need in a trial to really have findings that are meaningful and that are going to give us valuable data. And so we did that beforehand. And I would say the uptake of the research trial was actually pretty good, because prior to this, a lot of the trials that had been done on resilience were very small numbers, like a sample of 30 or thereabouts. So a sample of 143, while it's small in respect to the large organization, it's actually quite a good sample. The much larger trials, when you see trials with thousands of participants, they're generally done with Army personnel. And that's historically across workplace mental health. When you see very large trials, they're often done with the armed services, because they have internal researchers, and it's often sometimes written into their training to participate in parts of the research elements. So in terms of the sample overall, it's similar samples to what we're working with in other research projects across Black Dog Institute in terms of workplace mental health.
Thanks, guys. Sophie asks the question, is the program available to volunteers and family members? I know in Fire and Rescue we do make it available to family members. Any insight from the panel in respect to that question?
I think the access, really, I guess the customization has really been focused on tailoring it towards firefighters. With that said, I guess the broader groups, and I did mention at the start, we've got 500 odd administrative and trade staff across our organisation as well. So we're mindful of the benefit that this type of program can have for those groups as well. So the access is open to those groups within our workforce. So I guess while we've tailored it very much for our key customer with respect to firefighters, we do have administrative and trade staff that are accessing the program and finding good benefit in it as well. Do you have anything to add to that, Tracy?
As you say, I mean, ideally, it would be available for everybody, and how wide do we cast the net? But, I guess like many things, there are fiscal sort of constraints as well. But as far as all our employees goes, it's available for everybody. And it's voluntary. I think in some other organisations, they might have made a determination to make it mandatory. And that's another kind of conversation, I think, to have about the merits of either of those two approaches. For us, it's voluntary. So I guess we know that people who do enrol are enrolling because they're doing that of their own volition. So I guess the engagement level is possibly higher than if it was mandatory.
Thanks, guys. I think we'll make this the last question for the day because of the time is nearly upon us. But Kerry has a question in respect of graduates or new recruits to emergency services. This relates particularly to graduate paramedics with an ambulance. So what advice would you have to help them flex their resilience muscles safely when potentially entering the workforce for the first time?
I loved the tips that Tracy shared earlier, are extremely valid here. But having worked with a lot of paramedics and first responders in my private practice over the years, what I have learned is that for this profession in particular, self-care often falls away very quickly in their career because the job is so important and there's such a strong sense of purpose working as a paramedic or any form of first responder, which funnily enough is actually a resilience resource. Having a strong sense of purpose can bolster our resiliency. But because there's so much energy that goes into being a first responder, and this is similar for frontline workers, people who work in health and mental health too, is that it's very easy to forget taking care of this mind and this body. And I've worked with many people who are first responders that burn out because their self-care moved further and further down their list of priorities. And so I think one of the important things for new graduates is to look at their resilience, as I said, as a garden, that it's a muscle or even a muscle that needs to be worked out regularly, that there are resources that we can engage in, that we can replenish, that nurtures our resilience and protects our mental health. But that self-care needs to be considered as the foundation, and if not the paramount aspect of this. Like, how do we constantly honor self-care? Self-care is never selfish, particularly for people in service to others' work, like first responders are in. Your self-care allows you to replenish your resources so you can honor every other value in your life. And if that's not happening, and it's not honored, and it's not set up as a non-negotiable, you're not filling your cup up regularly, at some point, the balance, we're going to become unbalanced, and it is going to impact us physically or emotionally. So that would be my advice to any new graduate firefighter, paramedic, police officer, anyone who's a volunteer. Make self-care, and that means what are the things that really fill your cup up, what brings you back to feeling more like you, and scheduling that in your diary and honoring it like you would honor catching up with a colleague or a dear friend. That needs to come first and foremost, and that will hold space for you throughout your career. And please don't ever see that as selfish, because it's integral to you doing your work, but also all the other values, whether you're a parent or you're looking after elderly relatives, or you just want to enjoy life too. It's essential to it. That's a long answer, Michael. Sorry about that.
It's a great answer, Sive. Yeah, well said.
Sure is. It's very valid.
And I think a group that, you know, and on top of that, again, you know, have a particular risk in this area when it comes to focusing on the job and caring for others is our peer support network as well. You know, they obviously take on board, you know, additional responsibility in this space. So, you know, they're a cohort that I think this program, you know, has even added benefit on top of, you know, that, you know, in addition.
Absolutely. And that's for peer supporters across every organization. You know, they're the people who not only are they working in service to others' work, but they're putting their hand up to help their colleagues. And so I think we need to ask our peer supporters to ensure that they're really looking after their well-being too, because they very much deserve it. So
it almost sounds a little bit selfish, but in order to care for others, you need to ensure that you take time to care for yourself. I think that's an important lesson from what I'm hearing and what we observe, particularly in fire and rescue. Look, I just like to say thank you again to Sive, to Tracy, to Brendan for your time today. We're at the end of the session, and it's midday, so we need to let everybody get back to their normal lives. But just want to say thank you so much for your time, preparation and efforts. Really, really great session, and really appreciate it. On behalf of AFAC and for Stewart and Heaton, I'd just really like to thank everybody for attending and joining in and participating today. We're really grateful that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to join us for the session today. So thank you so much. At the end of the session, you'll be asked to fill out a quick survey so that AFAC can help to always look to improve on our professional development sessions. So if you could take some time to do that, that would be really greatly appreciated. And lastly, it's really been a pleasure to host you all today. And once again, thank you for attending. On behalf of AFAC and Fire and Rescue and all the panel members, we really appreciate your attendance, input, and your great questions. Stay safe, take care, and until next time, keep well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.